Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 71. My name is NBZ and as I sit here in the sweltering heat of a country that should not be this hot, I wonder, Bally, why it is that we've been cursed this way.
Yeah, it's really hot just now in Brussels, and I just had a nap today on my day off and woke up, and it is just like I've just felt drenched in sweat. It's just so horribly hot. I think it's like 27 degrees, and it's like late at night already. It's
Do you
can't
have
handle it.
AC in your abode?
Nope.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've been thinking, like, I was having a discussion with my sister, and like, why don't more houses have central heating and AC? It's
Most
like,
of Europe just doesn't.
yeah.
Like,
And you'd think, like, with the varying fluctuations in temperature, it'd be a smart thing to do.
yeah, yeah.
But hey, you go to Florida and they only have AC. There's no central heating there because they never really need it.
Yeah.
But it's the way it works, Bally, it's the way it works. Anyway, I didn't introduce you. You're Bally. Hi, Bally.
Hi,
Welcome to the
MBZ and
show.
Bally. I do this here podcast with you.
You do. And we're here today to talk about things about Nintendo and some other stuff. So let's get into what that is. How about you tell them what the rest of the show will entail?
We are going to talk about what we've been playing. We have some of your emails, and then for our third segment, we're going to talk about this little thing called Pokemon Go, as well as another Nintendo announcement, the Mini NES.
Yes, indeed. So lots of crazy, positive Nintendo news going around, and we'll be sure to dive into it. But before we do that, let's get to some video games, Bally. I know you've been busy, been finishing some stuff off. What are we going to wrap up today?
Yeah, I've finished up Box Boy, so we're recording a little earlier this time. I have been quite busy, so I've not had a massive amount of time to play some stuff, but yeah, finished up Box Boy. I believe you finished it up as well, MBZ.
I did, and by finishing up, we both did all the crowns in every world, including the bonus worlds. I didn't do any of the challenge stuff. Actually, well, I did the first challenge world just to see what it was like, and it was kind of a mini time trial-esque thing, but it was like across 4 levels. You were a ninja block, you were very quick. It was kind of neat, but it wasn't really what the core of the game was. So I thought that's cool to see, but I'd rather just leave it at the main levels.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. They're interesting. If I was a little less burned, which I'll get to in a second,
Yeah.
I'd probably dive into those. But in general, I absolutely love the game. But by the end, I must admit I was burned out a little bit. I was definitely keen. I was very keen to get to the end of the game to get all the crowns, just because I wanted to see every level. Like I feel like, especially with the podcast and things, I like to see all of a game before I sort of have a final assessment of it. I think
Have that
that's
full
only
perspective.
fair. Yeah, I love it. I love having a full perspective, and I wanted to see if the game would mix up, particularly in many ways near the end of the game. And it does in some ways, but maybe perhaps not quite enough. I must admit, I might have overpraised the amount of innovation in this game last episode. I think we both, or at least I definitely said that it was incredibly innovative and is a massive jump up from the first game. I would maybe pull that in a bit now and say it's great, but if they were ever going to make a third game, I feel they really have to reinvent the model quite substantially for me to be excited about it. Like I'm now needing something a bit more unusual.
Yeah, I agree. I think it scratched an itch because I really enjoy playing that style of game, and I think the puzzles were fantastic. I found them weirdly easier than the first, and I think it's generally to do with the fact that I'm well trained on the model and I know how to kind of finagle my way around and make things work in this game and being economical with your boxes and everything. But I do think, like, had you wiped my memory and sat me down with this game as opposed to the first one, I wouldn't be able to go back to the other one and say, this was that much different. Like there are key elements that are so similar, and parts of the old game which brought in like different environmental hazards and things that they just keep using. Like, there's not really anything new. You get those conveyor belts with spikes on them. You get like the sticky pads, which are the same as the last game. There are lots of environmental additions that they made as your progression went on in the first version of this game, and they don't add new ones of those, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I just think it's great. I love more levels. I think it is broadly speaking, I find it about as difficult as the first, but the biggest difference between the two is I think with the first I was much more prepared to. I invested almost double the amount of time, I believe, not quite
Same,
double.
yeah. I
Well,
took 13 hours on the original game, and this one took me like 7-ish.
yeah, I was about 16 on the first and maybe 7 or 8 on this one. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
But I was.
It is slightly shorter. They're only
It
16 worlds as
is.
opposed to 22, but that's not a huge gap,
Yeah,
really.
I just feel with the first I was much more prepared to really work it out myself, really struggle with every sort of every
Right.
puzzle and get
And that's
there.
because it was new and it was a different kind of thing that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, whereas by the end of this game I was getting way more sort of I just want to get to the next level and get this done, and I was using lots of hint coins. But I mean, the cool thing about hint coins is that they ultimately don't help you with the crowns.
Right,
So that
yes.
is still an added challenge for someone like me who was just trying to get through the end of the game fairly fast. So that was still
Sure.
quite a nice mix up.
Yeah, I like that. I like that they give you a hint towards how to get somewhere, but then they let you figure out yourself
Yeah.
how to get the crown, which some of those are very challenging and they really require a lot of lateral thinking. I think this game is really smart about that in the way that it makes you take a look at a different angle of how you can do it. And
Mm.
we were talking a little bit about this, but I think the game is definitely weaker when it makes you use athletics almost, in the sense of
Like action based
right, right.
elements to the puzzles rather than just pure, mental uh, puzzle gaming. I don't know.
Strategy, yeah.
Strategy, exactly.
Um, yeah, so when you have to basically like make a jump quickly and do something in a specific time period, that's when the game is at its weakest because as a platformer, it's not great mechanically. Like the jumping is not good, so it doesn't really hold up that well. And yeah, it creates situations when you're maybe like, maybe I feel like I cheesed this a bit more than I should have
Hmm.
done.
I think this game has a lot more of that than the first game. It felt like
Yeah,
and I think that's almost as a result of the fact that you're creating two sets of blocks because often you'll rely on one block to vanish in order to create another block, but then use the block in the middle to do something else with. So it's often
right,
you're often creating almost like mechanical traps
sure,
that are used to get you all over the place and like different puzzles and things. But yeah,
yeah.
I like it. This game overall, I still think it's an incredible game. I love the idea that it's a cheap download game that is very long, very meaty, and just sort of comes out of nowhere. And you download it and you play it, and like the whole internet talks about it at the same time. I feel like the internet wasn't quite as chatty about this game as obviously the
Well, I
first. I
mean,
think that had a way bigger impact.
even the first one wasn't that widespread. Like I remember
Yeah.
looking at the NeoGAF thread for it, and it really was only like 3-4 pages long. Not many people played that game,
Mm.
unfortunately. Like I think in our circles, we saw on Twitter lots of people talking about it. But yeah, it's still like even on this thread, there's only a couple of pages of people talking about it because whatever reason, like Nintendo downloadable games, I don't know, they just don't have as much of a spotlight.
Mm.
And they should try and focus more on like marketing things like Box Boy because they're
Yeah.
really cool franchises that they need to get out there into the sphere a bit more public eye. But I would say, Bally, maybe because you're rushing through, that might also have to something to do with it. I felt more positive on it, I think, by the end because I remember with the original Box Boy, you blasted through, and I kind of wanted to do the same, and so we were really like on it 24/7.
Mm.
Whereas this one, I took a step back. I was playing a lot of Fire Emblem at the same time, so I wasn't really playing that much of it consistently. I did like one world and then like put it down. So I think like playing it at a kind of slower pace made me enjoy it a bit more.
But yeah, overall, really cool game. Still enjoyed it a ton. Maybe not as much as you this time round, but that's Box
Yeah,
Boy. Box Boy. Did I say the right number of boxes?
Yeah,
Hopefully.
God, it's a
God, I hope
it's a bad name.
Box
Look.
Boy doesn't come out.
Oh dear,
Oh
please,
God.
let's not
Anyway,
enter
that'll be
that
for next year
world.
maybe. But MBZ,
Maybe.
other than Box Boy, that was two boxes. What
Yes.
what have you been playing?
Well, Valley, I've been in the land of Japan. I went to Japan,
You went
and
to
I found that
Japan.
there were some animes. Uh,
Hmm.
so I've been playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions, sharp FE, not a hashtag because this game is it's a very musical game, one might say. I gave some brief impressions of it last week, talking about like what it looked like and everything. And I will say this is one of my favorite looking games.
Mm.
Not that it's the best looking, but I really love the aesthetic they've gone for. It's so colorful. Like it just pops in an amazing way and just makes me feel comfortable. You know when we talked about, I think a few episodes ago, there's an email about like being scared of Dark Souls and why that is, and the idea of me
Yeah,
being
yeah.
uncomfortable in certain game
Mm.
environments. Tokyo
Yes.
Mirage Sessions is the epitome of the opposite of that, where
Mm.
it is just it feels homely and nice to just play, and that kind of caused me to fall into a slump of just barging through the first 20 hours of the game. I really just sat down and like 6 7 hours a couple of days in a row was just fully whole hog because it drew me in that same Xenoblade way of not wanting to put things down, just continuing to push forward through the story and stuff. And I think that maybe that had burned me out to some degree. Now, RFN talked about this recently, and they mentioned some issues with the pacing, and I think they are pretty on point. Because once you kind of get into the rhythm and the mode of like doing a chapter, which involves going through a dungeon, fighting enemies, doing a boss, and then getting to the intermission phase. And the funny thing about this intermission phase is basically the time at which the game lets you do side quests and stuff like that. But when they first introduce it, they say, "Welcome to the intermission phase. This is a point in the game in which nothing of significance will happen." So they just like straight up, none of this really matters. Just go ahead and do a bunch of bollocks, and we'll. I like that it says it like it is. Like there's lots of good writing in this game. I think the funniest of that stuff comes from the gamepad, which in this title is used as basically a text messaging app. They call it like topic is what they call it, which is really weird. Like the way they reference it just sounds strange. Because they're like, oh yeah, I'll send you a message on topic, and it just I don't know. It's just one of those things you have to get used to. But essentially, you have WhatsApp on your gamepad, and various characters will send you messages through it, and you can't really talk to them because it's just the dialogue is there and it will happen automatically. You just like swipe up the screen and you see stuff roll by. But I posted an image to Twitter like when I first started using it, and some of the writing is like really accurate to the way people text each other. I don't know, it just felt very naturalistic and funny and just well written. And I think it was Atlas who localized the game, and they've done a really good job on that stuff. I think like the main story stuff is very kind of canned and hammy and pretty typical, tropey JRPG stuff. But I think it's weird because you get these characters who speak in a certain way when you're watching the cutscenes and like reading dialogue in the actual story, and then their demeanor kind of changed and they feel more like real people on the text app. So it's a little bit of a disconnect. But I think it's a cool usage of the gamepad, right? Because we never really see companies going out there and taking the gamepad and doing much cool with it these days, especially like the state of Wii U and where it's at. It doesn't seem to make sense for most people to go after that stuff, but I like the addition. I think it's cool, and it freshens up what could be maybe a very cliche and mundane JRPG, which I think generally it falls along the lines of a persona, in the sense that you are going through dungeons and you're, getting to know people a bit more. But I think it's definitely weaker when it comes to the writing aspect. It's much more tropey. The characters feel like they aren't that individualistic. I mean, they are, but they're not. They're not like memorable.
Yeah.
Will I say? they feel more like, okay, this is the girl who is a bit edgy and she like wants to be cute, so she like is hiding that part of herself and stuff. It doesn't feel necessarily like real people with issues that can be related to. I mean, they in a sense they can, but they're kind of done in a hammed up way.
Yeah.
Whereas Persona 4 is much better at that stuff, and maybe it's because it's like the Japanese voice acting, so I'm
Yeah.
reading stuff as opposed to hearing it, and that impacting me less. I don't know if that's an issue.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to ask. Is that disconnect maybe due to the fact that it's not being re-voice acted in English, and that all the tropes must shine through a lot more if you're just hearing them in Japanese, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's also because I'm reading the English much faster than the Japanese voice acting is happening. And so in Persona 4, I would always listen to the full English dialogue. I'd always, even though the line below I could read faster on my own, I liked the voice acting so much that I would get the entire sentence, right? And so by doing that, you hear the tonality, you hear the up and down, and you hear like what they're trying to get across, not just what they're saying, but like tone of voice matters, right? And by skipping the Japanese stuff there, I think I'm missing some of that, right? So like their reactions to certain things and the loudness and softness of their voices maybe is getting cut off from me because I'm just reading the text and not really waiting for the Japanese to come. Because I mean, in a sense, there's no reason for me to do so because I'm just sitting there waiting for this thing I don't actually understand to happen. So yeah, it's a little strange in that sense. But I do think that the characters aren't as strong. They're fine. They're not doing it in the same way. However, I do think that on a combat standpoint and the dungeon stuff is much more well executed. The dungeon places you go to are much more puzzle focused. They're not necessarily that complex, but the way Persona 4 worked was you go into this place and it's randomly generated, and you're literally running down corridors and trying to find a certain room with a staircase that goes up to the next floor. And there's like 7 floors, and you're just doing this for every dungeon. All the dungeons in Persona 4 look different. They have nice aesthetics to them, but there's not really much you're figuring out as opposed to just running around and killing enemies. So this game has different puzzles tied to the certain dungeons. So one of them might be like, it's kind of a maze-like area, and there are these cameras, and if you get in line of sight of a camera, it'll warp you back to the beginning of that area. So you need to kind of navigate around, find the places that you won't get seen by the camera, make sure you find your way to this next area, and there are warp points along the way. And so the way it works is like you get to a warp point and you can just like jump back out of the dungeon, and if you go back to the dungeon you can just warp straight to that area you were at, which makes it much nicer in terms of like managing your magic points and your health, because there are like vending machines outside in Tokyo that you can just go up to and it'll heal your whole party basically. So in terms of like item management and stuff, it makes it a much more smooth experience for someone who doesn't want to like waste all their stuff and use up their mana and all those kind of like inventory management things that kind of slow down and bog things in an RPG.
But overall, like, quite high up your list of RPGs, around the middle, or too many issues to
It
to rate it in the top tier?
Yeah, well, if you'd asked me after 20 hours, I would have said I really love it. I think it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite games this year. But it does start to get very repetitive.
And you've almost
like,
finished it, right?
I'm in chapter 5 now. I'm actually I just finished chapter 5. I'm in the intermission before chapter 6, and chapter 6 is the last chapter. I'm like 40 hours in, so I've dumped quite a lot of time in. Yeah, there's so many little inconveniences that I think bog down other people's experience. I didn't find them too bad because I was listening to podcasts a lot of the time, and so loading screens and things like that aren't getting at me the way that they may do others. But I can totally understand where people are coming from when they're like, it takes like ages to do anything, because the way you upgrade your weapons in this game is you have to go back to this certain place to talk to this one person who can do it for you. So the way it's structured is it forces you to leave the dungeon multiple times, because once you've like maxed out a weapon, you get a bunch of skills on each weapon, and once you've maxed it out, you're not really gaining anything from using that weapon anymore. Like, weapons have their own individual levels, which are independent from your own leveling up stuff. So you have to like leave the dungeon, go to this place, make sure you have the right materials, talk to this person, make a new weapon, equip it, and then go back into the dungeon. And between then, you have maybe 3-4 load screens, you have a lot of downtime. I guess it kills the pacing for a lot of people. It didn't really do that for me, but I just think like over time, it just gets repetitive, just doing the same dungeons again. I like the combat. The combat is very cool because it implements a lot of these Fire Emblem things of like, hey, swords beat lances, or axes, sorry, and axes beat lances and all that stuff. And there's other Persona things with the magic, which goes on, and I kind of like have some knowledge of that from Persona 4, although I didn't really go in depth with it. But it's very easy. It shows you like when enemies are weak to stuff, so you can just use without having to figure out yourself. And the session attacks, which are basically, it's essentially, let me explain it like Pokemon. Imagine if in Pokemon you used a super effective move, and then by doing that, another Pokemon jumped in and did another move on top of it by like linking to it. So say like Charmander does a fire move on a grass type. That fire move would then link to, like, say, another Pokemon which used a water move, and then that water move would link to another one which used a grass move, and they'd go in like a chain. So you have these chains of reaction that you can do that involve all the party members and get them all rolling in at once. And essentially, enemies have a bunch of HP, so the real way to deal with them and make sure you take no damage is to kill them before they even have a chance to move. And I think that's something that Persona does a lot as well, is like knocking them down prone so they miss their turn, and using super effective moves on them to like chain them together and make it like last a longer period of time. And that stuff is very nice to look at. But after a while, again, as I've said with a lot of this game, it starts to kind of wear thin because you've seen the animation so many times, but it's the most cost-effective way of dealing with enemies, so why wouldn't you do it, you know? And by the end, like, everyone is jumping in. Like, you have Lance Blaze, which changed to Blaze Bow, which changed to Bow Electric, which changed to Electric Sword. Like, all the, like, things link together in this way that makes it this unending cycle. And it's good, but again, you know, it's pretty to look at, and then you're done. So I like the game a lot. I think it's neat. I want it to be over. It should have been over 10 hours ago, basically. I just think it's overstayed its welcome a little bit. But yeah, I'm enjoying it, and I'm glad I picked it up because it's very different, and it's just scratching an itch right now. So happy that I am playing it.
Anything else in your gaming
not
repertoire
really.
the last 2 weeks?
No, I mean, I was at home, and I wanted to use that time to dig into as much Tokyo Mirage sessions as I possibly could, and that's what I did. So, yeah.
Very nice.
Pretty much it. We will take a break here, however, and we'll be back on the other side with some of your emails. So don't go anywhere. We'll return to answer all your quandaries.
街のざわめき愛想笑いの憂鬱本音なんていつかどこか見えないふりだねだって不安なんてそんな言われなくても分かってる壊したい大事そうに抱えた強がりなんてでも素直になれない迷っても悩んでも君が求めるならせめてこの孤独を痛みを壊して生まれ変わりたい
Hello everyone, welcome back to the second segment of episode 71 of This Nintendo Life. I am Bally and I'm going to bring you some emails this fine segment. So, before I get into those emails, let me remind you of that address. The address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. We're always running out, and we'd really appreciate it if you sent in some. We always like when you talk about maybe the hot topics, the news, and we like to tackle those first. So, on to the first question, which is from Chris, who's from the internet. Hello, MBZ and Bally. It's been a while. My question this time revolves around a topic I don't believe you've touched on before. As you know, we're coming up to the 2-year anniversary of the Nintendo Wi-Fi shutdown of May 20th, 2014. In light of this, what are your thoughts on the Wi-Fi replacement service Wiimmfi? Have you ever used it now that you both live far away? What were your favourite Wii games to play online back in the day, and have you ever considered going back to the ones you missed now that there is a means to do so? I know Bally isn't one for hacking, but I'm sure MBZ could hijack his Wii and get everything set up. Cheers once again, Chris.
Well, I don't think Bally will be hacking anytime soon. I think
CBA.
Also, his technical know-how is nowhere close to being able to do so.
Of course. I think I would just break it and it wouldn't even work.
You probably would.
Would.
I think, I have contacts, I might say, through Pokemon days who would be able to hook me up with some links to things that I could figure it out. But I think even if you had that Bally, you might be out in the cold because you just are afraid of technology.
The second you've tampered with it as well and it's broken, you sort of lose your warranty, as it were, for Nintendo to potentially even fix it or anything. So
that's true. But again, it's your Wii, which you've transferred everything over to Wii U at this point. So does that really matter? I don't know. It might do, it might not. It depends on how you feel about it.
Yeah.
But I think the crucial point here is he's asking about the Wi-Fi replacement service, which I think there are a few of them. I think there are a couple of different people who back things up. I remember when everything went down, there were people who did a specific thing for the DS, and I don't know if that's the same. It must be the same because the network were both run by GameSpy, and it was all a singular entity that got shut down. But I remember having to type down some specific number that Nick told me to go to this website and fill out a form which would allow me to use my Diamond Friend code to try and get a thing. I don't know. It was a mess. And I probably have that information around somewhere, so I could figure it out and find it. And I don't know if I will, but I think that if it is something like in the future, 10 years from now, I want to play some Diamond with some people for nostalgia's sake, it's cool that it exists, right? Because obviously Nintendo don't have a solution to it. They don't have any way to bring this back. So the fans going out there and doing that stuff is a big deal. And I'm interested to see whether they would go and try and shut stuff like this down. It makes no sense to do so, obviously, because their own service is offline. But there was this big story earlier this year about how some private World of Warcraft servers, which were just vanilla World of Warcraft without any of the new stuff they've got on there, got shut down by Blizzard because obviously they want people playing their current stuff. They don't want people going off and doing stuff for free when they have a subscription, all that stuff. And everyone got very angry about it. I don't think Nintendo would do that in this case, but I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
I mean, I'm sure Nintendo would try to do it if it ever looked like these small projects looked like they were gaining momentum and, was detracting from people playing the current online games. But I just feel that they potentially aren't to any
or even
degree.
If Nintendo managed to set up a scenario where say Virtual Console DS games could connect online or something along those there'd be a lot of hankering to do. I don't think they would want to do it, but there's a possibility. So we'll see. The thing that I could very easily mod my Wii right now if I wanted to, because all my stuff is transferred over to my Wii U and it's potentially safe to do so. The reason I don't is because I'm still recording my Twilight Princess on my Wii, and that LP I want to continue forever and ever, and never is going to end.
The amount of things that have happened in my life since that LP started, honestly.
It's momonumental.
Most
really
of my
is.
life feels like it's happened in the space that...
You're right. I often get tweets from people who said, I was a junior in high school when you started this LP, and now I'm getting married. And I'm like, okay, well... That's some context.
Yeah.
So definitely time periods have elapsed. But I think maybe if I figured out a better recording solution, I'd be able to do it. There's this weird issue I have where when I try and record stuff through my current HD PVR off my Wii U, if it goes into Wii mode, it doesn't detect on the TV and it all goes blank. So I can't properly record it because I can't see the TV of what I'm playing. And if I wanted to try and do it from the screen that pops up on the laptop or the desktop, that has significant lag to it, which is like 2-3 seconds behind. So it would be impossible to do that. So if I got like an Elgato or something which worked, I would be able to just, start on the Wii U and play through that and then hack my Wii. But at the moment, it's too much of an effort, and I'm not going out to buy new equipment at the moment. It doesn't seem like a relevant thing for me to do quite yet. So that's that on that case. But let's maybe get around to his actual question, that is an interesting one. What were your favourite Wii games to play online back in the day? I know there weren't a huge amount, Bally, but we played a few of them, and we had some good times, some tough times with them, but for sure I know one is at the top of your list.
Definitely my number one by a long way is Mario Kart Wii. I think, to be honest, it was, broadly speaking, the only online game I devoted a lot of time to. I definitely dabbled in perhaps a bit of Mario Strikers Charged online. I thought that was a really solid infrastructure going on there, actually. That was quite a good game to play. As famous as it is, Super Smash Bros. Brawl was an absolute hot mess.
I don't remember us trying and failing, though.
Really?
I just don't have memories of us
like,
giving it a bash and saying it was bad. I remember everyone talking about how it was bad, and then us not really trying it that often.
I distinctly remember trying when it came out, and we said, this is hot mess, we're not even going to try it again.
Yeah, maybe that did happen.
I even played with Charlie. We even played in an O&M tournament on Brawl.
Really?
This was
Charlie played an O&M tournament on Brawl. What? When did he? What?
And
That's
he
weird.
got further than me.
Really?
Yeah. So he got through the first round. I lost the first round, and that was back in the MSN days.
Right, yeah. God. No Skype back then. Well, Skype did exist, but we were all using MSN, I guess.
I think Mario Kart Wii was infinitely by far the best game online of the Wii generation. Because basically I really enjoyed the weekly trials and stuff like that. For a while I would do all that stuff where you're trying to get the best time in the world for collecting, say, 8 item boxes around this awkward course and things like that, and I just absolutely love, and I've done this with time trials on numerous Mario Kart games, but I just love trying to shave seconds of time off and really perfect everything to do with that, and it does get quite obsessive in a bit of an unhealthy way, but it's good fun.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because these days you're not the type of person who goes on and plays with randoms. I think Splatoon's the one exception there that's happened recently. But usually if we're playing online, it's me and you just playing against each other or with each other or whatever. It's not necessarily going on and finding a bunch of random people in a ladder and just, matchmaking. But Mario Kart Wii was really the first one that did that and was big deal for you, particularly. I do remember playing some Mario Kart Wii, but Mario Kart Wii is objectively a piece of trash, and I hate it. So it's probably my least favorite Mario Kart game of all time. But I'm trying to struggle to think what other things there were in terms of Wii and online. Animal Crossing was a big one, right? And remember how much of a fucking mess the whole voice over with the microphone and hearing everything in the room. Do you recall us playing Animal Crossing online?
We both bought City Folk, I want to say, on launch or close to launch.
It was. I think I got it for my birthday, around the time it came out.
Complete with the what do you even call that thing?
We Speak.
We Speak, and it was just horrible. I feel like this was past the point. We were already using Skype, I want to say.
Yeah, I think we were.
So it was weird and dumb, and it just was a massive echo chamber, and it's just a really crap bit of technology, to be honest, even for the time. And we've talked about this numerous times, but we were very burned out on Animal Crossing at that point in time anyway, because we'd played Wild World and enjoyed that so much. So it was just a bit of a flop for us.
Yeah, it was the game that came out, and we realized, oh wait, this is the same thing again, and we've kind of already done this rodeo, and it doesn't seem like make much sense to keep
I've
doing
not
it.
played New Leaf, but it feels like they made a lot more changes between City Folk and New Leaf than they did
They
between
did.
Wild World.
They're
and
not as
City
monumental as you may think because it's
Okay.
still Animal Crossing, but
Yeah.
there's definitely a big enough gap there to where you could say, I played Wild World 10 years ago, this is probably a good place to jump back.
But
So
yeah.
that would be cool. But yeah, I think other things I can think of is us trying to use the We Speak on the We Speak channel, which I thought was also a mess, but weird and funny, and there were those bubbles that floated around. Do you remember that?
Weird, yeah, that was very
That was
weird.
that was a strange thing. But the other one is obviously Pokemon Battle Revolution, which I got to very late because it's actually your game.
Yeah.
It's one of those games I kind of stole from you and never gave back.
That's
Not that it
okay.
really matters because like you weren't playing competitive Pokemon at that time, and Battle Revolution really is not a good video game unless you're online. Like it's kind of pointless to play. It's not very interesting at all, and yeah, that was a big thing. I did a lot of videos with Nick, and that was a great fun time. I think generally, when it comes to online, I think the benchmark that Nintendo have are the Pokemon games. Aside from Mario Kart being probably the smoothest experience, Pokemon, because it's a turn-based thing, because you don't necessarily need those timing-based inputs like you do in Smash Brothers, it comes across very well, and it seems to have good, infrastructure behind it,
Yeah.
and generally stands out amongst their other stuff. And that was the case with Diamond and Pearl. And of course, there were connection issues here and there, but generally, like that was the gold standard for Nintendo's Wi-Fi connection back in the day.
I think certainly Splatoon has set a new benchmark for that sort of thing, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, well, these days they actually have a proper internet service, so that's the thing where like Bally and I just played Smash the other day, and it was perfect. And like,
Man, we had some
could
great
we have
matches.
imagined that happening? No,
Yeah.
so I'm glad that we're in an era where we can do that. It's much nicer, and I don't want to go back to those days because they are a little bit frustrating.
They're behind us and forever will be.
But thanks, Chris, for the question.
On to our next question, which is from Sid A, who's also from the internet. Dear MBZ and Bally, I love the podcast. I'm a recent convert to the series, but I've been enjoying it a lot. Your voices are very nice to hear whilst I'm revising for my A-levels. In response to an email from episode 64, I think that a Fire Emblem Maker style game would be great for the Wii U or perhaps the NX, because you could either create single levels with set starting units or build a series of levels if that's what you so chose. Obviously, there are already tools for making a custom Fire Emblem game, but I feel like Nintendo could make a version with a level of polish and user-friendliness that isn't really available at the moment. Anyway, my question is this. If Nintendo were to make a Star Wars game, what kind of game would you like it to be? Metroidvania, platformer, strategy RPG, etc. Keep the good stuff coming. Yours sincerely, Sid A.
Well, if there was ever a sharp left turn in the email, I've not seen it in a long time. This whole preamble about Fire Emblem is like, oh, by the way, let's talk about Star Wars. But yeah, I appreciate Sid's suggestion there with the Fire Emblem Maker.
Two things we love.
Absolutely. Bally, you and I were chatting a little bit about this before. I feel like it could be a cool idea to have a Fire Emblem Maker style game, simply because if you follow the format of the Advance Wars series, where you can create your own maps and kind of stylize it like that, and maybe if you built it in a deeper way, it would be possible to make something like a map maker. I think I agree with you, and the problem you come up against is Advance Wars. Every map you start out and it's you are going from scratch, and the units you have to create and all that stuff. Whereas Fire Emblem is all about the progression and having characters level up and things like that. So I think if you were to do it, you would have to balance it accordingly and just say you start with this set of units at this level and they have these weapons and these abilities. And that's actually interesting, I think, because it's a different take on Fire Emblem. It's not about your own characters that you're building. It's more about, here's a given situation, can you figure out this puzzle? And that's kind of more of the way that Conquest has gone for me, where it is definitely about leveling these units, but it's also about figuring out how to place them and what strategies to use. I think you could definitely take a more hardcore strategy edge to a Fire Emblem Maker style game if you were to implement that.
Yeah, I think that there are obviously possibilities for Fire Emblem to be a Maker style. I think if you imagine Fire Emblem more in terms of like miniatures on a stage, and if you think about all the miniature war games, from everything from Warhammer to whatever, so much of that game is like creating and changing, the environments and things like that, and that could definitely be applied to Fire Emblem. I think that once you start opening the maths and mechanics of RPGs out to a maker style audience, that it would backfire tremendously, and you would cut down your market massively in comparison to a game like Mario Maker. But it's definitely doable. We've had so many debates about what we think, if there is going to be a next Maker game. We definitely had a heated one on Metroid.
We did.
I think there's other things that they might try and do, but it's an interesting thing that I'm sure they're thinking about for the future, where to go next with the idea of user creation.
I mean, you can even look at maybe what they might do with the Fire Emblem mobile game for what will happen potentially, like, because I don't think that mobile Fire Emblem game will be a full RPG of progression of units to level. I think it might much be more like, here is a map with these units, beat the map. I think that they might pare it down that much to make it less complicated for new users, and be like, okay, these are the units you have. You don't have to pick what their weapons are. You don't have to pick what anything is. Just go and use them and strategize, and we'll make it simple for you. I think maybe taking that template and moving it onward would be an interesting thing to see.
Star Wars.
So Star Wars, Bally. Obviously, there are many Star Wars games that have been on Nintendo platforms before, and they're very they all fit into the idea of vehicle-based games or action-adventure, third-person behind the camera stuff. There's lots of different genres that I am a huge fan of that Star Wars could really open up in a cool way. So one thing, leading off the Fire Emblem suggestion, I've always had this thing I wanted, where take Fire Emblem and reskin it as other IP. And Game of Thrones is a big one that I've always wanted, like, someone to ROM hack the GBA Fire Emblem games and create like a Game of Thrones style version of that. I think if you take that model and apply it to the futuristic setting of Star Wars as well, could be very cool. And the whole, classes based in different Jedi, and then bounty hunters and things like that, it could all work out in a similar fashion. So that's a neat thing. But the suggestion, one of them he makes, is Metroidvania, which 100% I would be on board with that. I think that is a fucking fantastic idea. There are action platforming style games on the Super Nintendo, I think, with the Super Star Wars series, but those are obviously left to right, run, kill things. I think with a Metroid style game, especially if you're playing as a Jedi, the amount of power-ups you could get with or even as a Sith, I think the Sith would be more interesting, getting that screw attack moment with Force Lightning, for example. Going through and upgrading with these different Jedi powers would be so cool. I think they could do an excellent job in that style of power progression.
I'd love to just see open world. I know it's a very obvious pick to do for Star Wars, and it'll be compared to obviously, God, what is that base game coming out that's been coming out for ages?
Mass Effect?
Not Mass Effect. The one with all the planets that you fly between and all this.
No Man's Sky?
No Man's Sky. I know that it would be compared to that perhaps a lot, but I think the possibilities are absolutely endless with a genre an IP like Star Wars, I should say. It's just incredible what you can do, and I love the macro and the micro, and I'm not too fussed about the stuff in between. I like the idea of being able to see everything, but at the same time I loved a really stupid little game like Jedi Power Battles, which is obviously so focused on episode 1, and you're all in environments around the Naboo and stuff like that, and I love that stuff. So I really do think that something that can take you from the macro to the micro with a universe like Star Wars in an open world game, I think could work.
Yeah, I think the stuff they're working on right now, especially the Visceral game, which they announced a little more about when Star Wars Celebration was happening this weekend, they were very much saying, yes, this is going to be an Uncharted-style game. It's going to be very linear, very story-focused, all that stuff. I think that's where things are happening right now in the AAA space for Star Wars, but I 100% think that there should be more smaller style Star Wars games that could be downloadable, and I think stuff like Metroidvania and platformers and things should be considered, because they could sell very well. Like, there's a certain audience who has a nostalgia for old Star Wars movies and old classic games. So I think that there is a market you could tap into there. The question is whether they want to do that. Because I think the problem is they also find, like, maybe undervaluing the property if you say put out a Metroidvania for $20 as opposed to, hey, this is Star Wars, this is worth more than that. You know, that's the other worry that maybe Disney run into.
Yeah, I think I'd be surprised if they move away from anything that's anything close to a AAA game that's had like a ton of investment and things like that. And I do worry that Nintendo seem very far away from anything to do with the Star Wars IP at the moment, and getting, you know, dribs and drabs of Disney Infinity and Star Wars Lego, and there's not really been anything for quite some time, I feel like, on Nintendo's platforms. So
no, I mean, obviously that's synonymous with third parties in that situation. But hey,
I love the good old days of Rebel Strike and Rogue Squadron. Those were the days.
Yes, they were.
On to our final question this week. It's from Terrence, who's from North Carolina. Hi, MBZ and Bally. Quick point before my question. Obviously, MBZ is neck deep into Fates, but you guys answered the question about gaming regrets, and MBZ mentioned classic JRPGs like Chrono Trigger, and I didn't hear Final Fantasy VI in that list. The greatest Final Fantasy should be in your backlog, trust me. Anyway, on to my question. Clearly everyone, including Nintendo, is on the very slow hype train called NX, stating clearly that is not the next version of the 3DS or the Wii U. Good, right? Well, maybe not. I wonder how Nintendo's desire to distance its new console from the old will impact their gaming decisions. If they want this next console to not be a reminder of the Wii U, what does that mean for Amiibo integration or the continued use of the Maker concept or any of the good ideas the Wii U brought forward? We know Nintendo has an idea, even if they won't tell us, but what would you guys do in bridging the gap between the next console and the last one?
Okay, so before we jump into that, I will address the Final Fantasy VI thing that he brings up, which I'm surprised I didn't actually mention that back then. When we I think we did it like a question ages ago, where it's like, what's your like bucket list of things that you need to go back and beat at some point? But Final Fantasy VI is absolutely on my list. My only problem is there are ways to play it that I'm not a fan of right now. I would love to play that game on the Wii U Virtual Console with the gamepad. That is what I would love to do. The unfortunate thing is in Japan, they have released Final Fantasy VI on Wii U Virtual Console, and Square Enix have not done so in the West. For whatever fucking stupid idea that is, I don't know why. They need to hurry up and get the hell on it, because I could play it on the Wii. Like, if I go into the Wii menu of the Wii U, go into the Wii Shop channel, download it there, have to... Like, it just feels like too much of a mess to do that. Plus, I have the addition of save states if I ever wanted to use them. Not that I needed them in Chrono Trigger, actually, because I played the DS version of that. But it's just the modern conveniences I would like. And the other way to play Final Fantasy VI, I think, is on the PS1 remake... Not remake... I think it was, it's on the Vita, it's on the PlayStation Store. It might have been a remake. It was a PS1 version of Final Fantasy VI, but it had a bunch of load times in it. And those load times are something that people have said are a bad thing, so that puts me off that one. There's the GBA version, which is nowhere unless you have a cartridge. So basically, I want to play Final Fantasy VI and they're not giving me a good way to do it. Also, there's a Steam version with artwork that looks ugly as fuck, and everyone says that it is the bad thing to look at, so I don't want to do that either. So I'll get to Final Fantasy VI one day when Nintendo give me a fucking easy way to play it that isn't bad, basically. That's the crux of it.
I think bridging the Wii U and the 3DS to the NX is like... I think it's quite low on their priorities of things to do, in all honesty, because I think they're planning on the NX to sell a hell of a lot more than the Wii U. Maybe not the 3DS, so maybe that's an interesting area where there could be some link. I mean, it's so hard to speculate about all this when we know so little about the NX. Personally, I think they do need to do some sort of handover digitally in terms of at least virtual console games, let's say, or a few of the indie titles. Like, I think it would be a shame if there's literally no connectivity between my 3DS and Wii U and the NX. Like, the idea that I have to go back to the 3DS, my 3DS or my Wii U to play everything on those and that nothing will carry over might be a bit frustrating. I don't want to be in a position where if I say I want to play a classic game again, like something like Link to the Past, I don't want the idea of having to download that again. Like, I hope they do something to connect those areas at least.
Third time's the charm, right? You know, like we've already been burned a couple of times.
And you're right, and we were burned, and we've mentioned it already this segment, but Nintendo's online infrastructure has improved tremendously since the Wii. And
sure.
You just hope and you have faith that, you know, they can do it, but ultimately they still have really stupid stuff like Super Nintendo games randomly appearing on the new 3DS, and obviously those are completely independent of your Super Nintendo games on your Wii U. And
right.
even when they do a sale, like with Earthbound just a little while ago, they did it on the Wii U but not the new 3DS, and it's like, what the hell? Come on.
Yeah, why is it in one place and not the other?
Yeah,
like, there's so much nonsense still in that ecosystem that needs to be just...
I hope they
it needs to be gutted and just refurbished, essentially.
Yeah, iron it out, re-gut it, but do it in time for the NX launch and link it all together. Like, please.
They have to have all their shop infrastructure ready for that launch, because look at the fucking disaster with the 3DS launch. They had no eShop support out the gate. Like, that took 3... Like, people forget, but that took like 3 months to come out. The eShop wasn't even fucking there. It was absurd. And so hopefully this delay and all that stuff means that they are making time for it and pushing it back and getting it ready. But I think maybe his notion of bringing along baggage from the Wii U as a problem is like not to be a reminder with Amiibo integration or the Maker concept. It's like, I think those are actually ideas that you can divorce from the system itself and just take as good ideas and bring them along, because they're the successful things that came out of the Wii U. Like, Amiibo obviously is an enormous business for them, and they wanted to continue doing so as they go forward. So that's not a thing that's inextricably linked to the Wii U and its failure, because it's one of the things that actually helps that system in a tangential way. And it's also associated with 3DS because you can scan them in there too. It's much more of this is a Nintendo umbrella thing rather than this is a Wii U thing. And again, with the Maker concept, like, that's something that they don't necessarily have to tie to this one system. Obviously, as we said, we don't know what NX is, so it could be, there may not be a gamepad that you can do the Maker thing on. But say that they do. That's a concept that is a good concept that they should bring forward, because it is something that had positive word of mouth and good buzz. So any of these decisions they made during the Wii U generation that were positive, I don't see why they need to be stranded on a platform and bogged down with all the horrible decisions that went with it.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the NX divorces itself of anything to do with the Wii U specifically. Like I said, I think the 3DS, due to the large number of 3DSs out there, they might want to try a bit harder to make sure there's some sort of connectivity, assuming that the NX is some sort of handheld / home console, which we don't even know that.
And those are the assumptions that will continue to be parroted. Yep. Until, I guess, September, October.
So,
whenever.
I mean, the NX is going to come up a lot between now and September.
It's already... Look, Bali, let's just say... Look, we're going to talk about the NX probably every episode until it comes out. So let's just keep doing that.
And we want you to keep asking us about it, because, you know...
Obviously.
I think it's a bit fun. It's fun to speculate.
What else is there to talk about in the world of Nintendo? It's not like anything good's happening, like Pokemon Go or anything. No, nothing. Nothing at all.
Spoilers.
Spoilers.
And with that, I think it is the end of the email segment, but as MBZ hinted, we have a couple of news items to talk about in the third segment. But before I go on to that third segment, one reminder of the email address. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Excuse me. So catch us after the break. We'll be right back with a couple of news items.
どんな時も感じてほしいのこの想いを折れない翼で私の歌もっと届けるからBe my voice と歌って Be my song 歌
Alright everyone, welcome back to the third and final segment of the show. We're here to talk about the goddamn phenomenon of Pokemon Go and all the other Nintendo news that has happened. Not much really, just two things that we're going to talk about. The NES Classic and Pokemon Go. And I think we're going to start off, before we get into the craziness...
NES Mini.
It's not the official name, Bally.
Is it?
I know that's been going around. I know you've been hearing people say the Mini.
Why are people lying to me?
I don't know, but the NES Classic Edition, I think, is the official name. I think Mini is being just tagged on certain areas, but I believe that is the case. Beep, 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 beep. Hello, NBZ here in the editing phase of the podcast, just here to correct my former self. Well, in fact, both Bally and I are correct. The way that the new NES was announced was the UK PR calls it the NES Mini, and the US PR calls it the Classic Edition. So, because of that, we've both seen different things, we've both heard different people talking on podcasts and have assumed certain aspects, whereas because of localization, Pushmo pull blocks, fucking Mario Brothers, Dream Team, it's all a mess. Localization is silly sometimes and titles get changed. So we're both right. There's your thing. Back to the show. Correct me if I'm wrong, audience, but I believe so, because someone else was corrected on that on another podcast I listened to, so I'm in the know. Anyway, let's talk about it, Bally, and let's jump off with an email that we received from Ryan, who's from Chicago, Illinois. And Ryan writes, "Hey NBZ and Bally, hope all is well. I saw the Nintendo announcement yesterday for the NES Classic Edition, and I got quite excited. Seems like an awesome, cheap, and easy way to play some old NES games. What I wanted to ask was what you thought about this announcement, and comparing it to devices like the Raspberry Pi, which can emulate multiple systems and a huge library of old games. I debated turning my old NES into a retro Raspberry Pi machine, but honestly, I'm not that tech savvy to engineer the whole thing together without a lot of potential trial and error. Do you enjoy fiddling with a device like that, or are you lazy like me and prefer a pre-made and pre-packaged machine like the new NES?
So,
P.S. I noticed that there are times when Bally's voice is much quieter than NBZ. Is this a technical mic thing, or is NBZ just naturally loud? Keep up the good work." So to address that real quick, I have many years of experience talking in a microphone, and I usually keep a consistent volume. Bally tends to go up and down here and there. He goes up and down. I try and edit it as much as I can in the podcast, but it's hard to go every crest
I
and
will
balance.
project my voice for the rest of this segment.
Thanks, Bally.
NBZ.
Thanks for doing that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Maybe it won't be as big of an issue when you get a different microphone. We'll see. That might also be a mic
We
thing.
will see. I'll hopefully do that this summer.
But maybe let's quickly hit the topic of the Raspberry Pi. Have you heard of Raspberry Pi stuff before, Bally? Do you know anything about this? I'm guessing no.
I've heard of it. I presume it's just a box that emulates crap.
Yeah, it's just a little thrown together emulation machine that you can hook up to a TV, and usually I think people just download ROMs from the internet, and it's probably a bit shady to do so, but that's the thing that people do. This is basically that, and obviously it's not the sort of thing I would go and do myself, because I don't know, it doesn't feel like I would care enough. I'd rather go on Virtual Console and download stuff and play it there. But let's talk about the NES Classic Edition itself. Because it is a very cool announcement. It's an announcement that makes a lot of sense for Nintendo's perspective, and it's an announcement that comes on the heels of really positive word of mouth for Nintendo at the moment. So, Bally, how do you feel about this device? What do you think it's going to do for them in the long run? Do you think there are ramifications after this, like a Super Nintendo Classic? How do you feel?
I think that due to the fact that there's obviously the Virtual Console and it's quite easy to access NES games relatively cheap, as well as the wealth of illegal downloads that go on online for NES games, that ultimately the biggest selling point I feel for this system is the plastic box as well as the replica controller. I think those are two really cool things that, someone who illegally downloads online obviously has no access to. And I think it's just an interesting thing to have all these games. It's 30 games, I believe, packed into the box for around $60. I think it's a really great package, but definitely the selling point, I think, is actually the box itself as well as the controller.
I think also the very interesting part of this is that there are third-party games as a part of this box. This is not just Nintendo first-party IP, which could run out pretty quickly. I don't think you could make a box with 30 quality classic Nintendo made games, and that's why things like Castlevania and Mega Man and all these other things allow the expansion of the library in a way that appeals to people and gets them on board and makes them say, and I think very much this is a thing that is marketed to an audience who are not in Nintendo's ecosystem currently, who have experience with old NES games from when they were younger, who are not necessarily gamers this time and place, but have been in the past, and are willing to pay $60 for a machine that is quality, is well made, has things they remember on it, and is basically for lapsed people. You know, that's what it feels like to me.
How many times, like in the last few years, have you heard people on podcasts and, you know, backseat CEOs of Nintendo saying, backseat, I mean armchair CEOs, that's
right.
the phrase I'm looking for, saying, oh, Nintendo have so many classic games, why don't they just put them all in one box and just sell it separately? And it's like, wow, they've actually finally done something that an armchair CEO has suggested. And
right.
We'll get on to Pokemon Go in a second, but it just feels like, you know, cogs are turning in the heads of Nintendo officials and stuff's getting done that wouldn't have been done a few months ago. And between this E3, the NX announcement to come hopefully later this year, they're not really putting a foot wrong in terms of very recent time.
I think what it really shows is that Nintendo, despite the fact that they are not doing financially that well as a company, and despite the fact that they are in the market of video games on the third pillar, like they're in the final position, they are behind everyone else, their brands have power. And that is something that we saw at E3 with how much Zelda was discussed. That is something that we have seen world fucking wide with Pokemon Go. And that is also something we're seeing now with this NES Mini, or the Classic, as is it officially called.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say, we should also maybe point out this important point that we're not actually, you know, massive NES fans. Like, there are very few games that we've played and enjoyed. I mean, obviously you're a big fan of Mega Man 2. I also enjoyed that game.
Yeah.
We just don't really like those games a hell of a lot. Like, they feel incredibly dated, but I think that even though this idea won't appeal to us personally, and that we will pick up the NES games that we like through the virtual console, for someone, like you said earlier, who's in their mid-30s perhaps, was around when the NES originally came out, who feels a bit nostalgic, has $60 to spare, they're gonna love this if they have fond memories of those games.
Yeah, that is the market this is targeted towards. It's like there's a lot of complaints online. It's like, well, it doesn't connect to the internet. Oh, we're not going to be able to add new games to it.
Neither did the NES.
Right, yeah, no, true, very true. It's like, oh, it doesn't have a cartridge slot. It's like, those things are so ancillary to what this device's purpose is. And this device's purpose is to infiltrate the mainstream of people who don't play Nintendo games today and who are not in their ecosystem. This is not for us. This is nowhere close to anything that is for us. If we wanted to get this machine and think, oh, you know, in the future on NX we can transfer it, that's not what this is going to do. There's no chance in hell of that happening. If you're bought into the ecosystem, you own virtual console games, you're on the Wii U, you know what's going on with Nintendo. You don't care about stuff like this unless you're someone who's very hardcore and really loves the NES and wants just a cool piece of tech which looks nice and will be well made because it's an internally Nintendo developed thing. It's also very smart that they have the classic controller, the NES controller in there, which connects to a Wii remote. The same slot of the bottom of the Wii remote is the slot on the machine itself, and that allows you to play with this on your Wii U if you wanted to do that as well. So like, that is being sold cheap. It's like $10, I think. So even if you don't want the box, you can get that. Plus, the Classic Controller Pro and the Wii U Pro controller both apparently work with this machine. So again, like, they've put in the hooks there for their current audience, but this is about so much more than their current audience, right? Like, this is about them pushing forward and taking the Nintendo name and realizing that we can take our brands and do cool things with them and not necessarily have to get people into our personal ecosystem. I think that is probably a good segue into the game of the moment, which is Pokemon Go.
Wow.
So, Everyone is fucking talking about this video game, Bally. It is fucking insanity. This is the craziest thing I have seen in a goddamn long time when it comes
There's
to
nothing
games.
I can compare it to. There's literally
No, I think the
nothing.
biggest thing you could compare it to is the original Pokemania in '98 when that came out.
And that wasn't overnight in the same way this was. That was like a few
It
weeks,
wasn't.
a few months. You know
It was also incredibly huge, but also we have to remember we're living in the internet age where everything is amplified that much more.
Yeah, you're right.
And so word of mouth and, people talking about it online is just going to spread this further than it even potentially could do in the 90s.
I think that I have a lot of concerns about this game, both.
Okay, let's get into it.
So we start with concerns.
Sure, let's go.
My first concern is from quite a sociological perspective, and that is that this is an awful lot of data that people have subscribed themselves to give away for free.
Right.
Now we can talk about the ownership of this game. It's very complicated, but basically the owners of this game, let's just call them Pokemon Company, even though it's partially them.
It's Niantic who made the game.
It's Niantic, but it does concern me how open people are to the idea of, hey, yeah, I don't mind giving away my information and telling all these apps where I am 24/7, going here, going there, going like that is valuable data that companies can sell on to
Absolutely,
other companies,
it is.
can
Yeah.
sell to governments, can sell to God knows what, that we have no idea what that could be done with in the future. So that's like a very political thing to say and suggest, and I don't want to kill anyone's joy from this party, but that does concern me, and I'll get into how I downloaded it, etc. But that's one area. Secondly, it's from my experience, from others' experience, it's just not a very slick game. It's not it's not a very gamey game at all. It's barely a game. It's an app, but ultimately the biggest thing about it is obviously the IP, and I am scared at the precedent it has set in terms of let's lob this incredibly popular IP onto a game, make it free. Relatively heavy promotion, not a ton. I won't say it was a ton, but I'm scared that Nintendo or other companies might get ideas like, hey, let's just lob Mario into a quick, easy Mario Kart, with digital controls, and say let's make a bundle of money from it. But
see, I don't share that concern in any way. Not at all. I think, interestingly enough, the whole concept of this game and the whole ethos behind it is so incredibly Nintendo when you think about it. Like, this is a game that is bringing people together. It's a game that is unlike anything anyone has ever seen, apart from Ingress existed before this. It's just because it's gone mainstream. Like, all the ideas and the philosophy behind this is very Satoru Iwata. Like, it is Nintendo trying to hit a mainstream audience and get everyone playing a video game together and having fun with it, So from those kind of philosophical aspects, despite Nintendo not having a hand in really creating this game, it's the sort of thing you like to think that they strive to do when they're creating software, and as such, your whole pitch of Mario Kart with digital controls is not something I imagine them trying to do at all, looking at this thing.
I don't think they will, but I guarantee you it will at least cross their minds. That's all I'm concerned about. And,
yeah, fair enough.
Who knows? We can get into this later as well, but I have good faith in Animal Crossing and Fire Emblem ideas that they're working on. But you're talking about bringing people together, and this is an area that I would like to mention, and that is probably the sort of underlying really incredible, pleasant surprise that has just come out of Pokemon Go.
Yes.
And it's not the game itself. It's not even the fact that it's maps. It's the fact that those maps bring people together. And you have to think about all the people that are playing these games. Like, obviously there are incredibly sociable types who would meet lots of people anyway and have great social lives and meet people all the time, who have jumped on Pokemon Go and said, hey, it's cool, you're playing it too. But there are so many people out there, including in the gaming community and elsewhere, who, are very antisocial types, are very closed-minded, might have issues in terms of, you know, social skills and things like that. And this game is like it's absolutely incredible for those types of people who feel they can connect with it, but then end up going to parks, catching all the Pokemon, etc., and meeting people at these parks, and then having these social experiences with people that in many other circles of life they wouldn't have had. And I'm not going to claim it was the intention of the game, and maybe it's too rich to call it a byproduct of the game, but it's something that the game does and is incredibly positive for. It's a positive way of how a globalized world and the massive growth of the internet can positively affect someone in those circumstances.
I think it's also ultimately the ethos of the Pokemon series, right?
That's
you remember
so true.
back in the day of watching the anime and playing Pokemon, and like, I'm not going to deny it, everyone, like myself included, fantasized about Pokemon being real in the real
Yes.
world. Like, it was a thing where I got
No one
excited
can
when
deny it.
there were these news stories about, they're trying tests to create real life Pokemon. I was so fucking jazzed. Like, all I wanted to do was like quit school and go outside in the world and become a Pokemon trainer. You know, just wander around with them, like fucking. That would be the thing. I would be Ash Ketchum. I would do that. Like, and this is a game that is taking that core fundamental philosophy behind this franchise and is realizing it not in the most grand way, but in a way that underscores those ideas and allows people to get out and explore and find different places and see people. And I think, again, this may be something to do with America and the US and, you know, that entire continent as an entity in terms of the way they interact with one another.
Yes,
I have a feeling
far
that when
more
it
open.
comes to the UK, and I haven't really seen that
Yeah.
many people play this game, you're not going to have the same kind of reactions and stories, because just as a culture and as a society, we're much more buttoned up and we don't like to really talk to one another, you know?
Yes.
Like, it's very much heads down and just moving onwards. So that's I think one thing that is like, a lot of this is positive, but it's also the culture of America is much more aligned to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's this crazy thing. It's seriously crazy. And I think it's important to note our personal experiences of the
Sure.
game. I downloaded it. I've not. This is a silly thing. I've not really got data too well in Brussels. I just use it at my work and at home where I've got internet. And I caught a Pokemon, but I just had zero. This sounds really sad. I had absolutely zero drive to, you know, try and make it work and go and get Pokemon. And that's the other thing. Every time I did think, I'll just open the app, it just crashed and like it wouldn't load. And,
Do you think that's something to do with like having a group of people though who want to go out and who want to do this thing together? Like, if you say talk to some people and we're like, hey, we should all go outside and wander around and see if this thing works. And maybe if it wasn't your phone necessarily that was doing it and you were with friends and other people doing it,
Yeah, and I've
that
done
might be
that.
something that is, you know, going to change your mind. I
mean,
know.
I've been around friends who have it and walked around with them and seen them like catch and say like, oh wait, let's walk over here and I can catch this Pokemon. I'm like, that's interesting, but it's not something I have a desire to do. And I know that there's more coming to the game. You know, they're trying to improve the battle system, I know, and there's like trading, improving the gym battles. There's even rumors of like Gen 2 eventually after all that.
Sure, of course that's going to
settled.
happen.
Of course, and I'm just not currently on that bandwagon. And it's funny because a lot of my friends and my colleagues, they know that I do this podcast. They know that it's Nintendo focused, and that's another issue, is that everyone associates this game with Nintendo, even though Nintendo only has a stake in it, not the majority.
It's a decent stake, but sure.
It's a decent stake, absolutely. But so people associate Nintendo and Pokemon. They know I do the podcast, so that everyone says to me like, "Oh, Bally, are you talking about Pokemon Go on your podcast?" And like everyone's asking me this. I'm like, yeah, I mean, we're gonna talk about it, but neither me or my co-host are like, massive fans of it necessarily, and everyone's really surprised, and they're like, oh, but I thought you loved, video games and Nintendo video games like Pokemon. I'm like, I do, but this isn't really a traditional video game in any sense of the word, and
right.
it's
and
so
I think
difficult.
that's the crux of it. Is this is a bad video game?
Very.
In fact, it might be a terrible video game. It's not good. Like, functionally, the app is broken. It is buggy. It is loaded all the time. The servers are a fucking mess. And yet, despite the fact that the catching is incredibly simple and the gym battles are a fucking touchscreen tapathon, that doesn't matter. That's not the point here. Like, it's bad, but the badness is... it's not what the fundamental core of the idea is. The idea is, I want to complete my Pokedex. I want to walk around to these places that I've not been before and catch things and add them to my digital list and tick them off and train my guys up so that I can take over this gym, because having my sign over this gym is this kind of... I don't know, this medal, this trophy that I can hold in this neighborhood that I am a part of, It's these outside influences which are much more effective at getting people interested in the game than the game itself, because the game is not a good game, and it doesn't do much, really. And I think that's kind of encapsulated in the way that I played it. So I downloaded it, got it first on my sister's iPad because I knew that would run it well and it would be fine, and my phone has some issues, but... So we did that, caught a Squirtle, which was just inside the house, and then realized, well, I can't really take this outside because there's no 3G connection. It doesn't have any data on it. So put that down, and then I decided to download it on my phone. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see how this goes, see if I find anything. And I decided to just go walk around the park for a little bit just to see if I could find a Pokemon. And I didn't find anything. I walked around the whole park, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll go somewhere else now. And the church that's like right down the road from me had a big sign over it, and clearly this was a gym, and it had a big hypno over the top. I couldn't see who was in charge of it, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go over there. So I walk over to the gym, find it, and it tells me, nah, you can't fight it. You have to be level 5 to do that. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how to get to level 5. So I'll just walk along and find something else. I found a Pokestop, which was near a hospice that's near my house, and clicked on it, spun it about. It gave me 3 Pokeballs. I'm like, okay, well, things are happening at least. Like, I'm not found a Pokemon yet, but things are happening. And so then I decided to go down by the sea, because we live kind of near the water. And so I go there trying to find some water Pokemon, and it's this, like, the interface it shows, like, here's an image of a Pokemon that's not filled in, that's like a shadow that has like some steps underneath it. It's like, if you walk this amount, you'll probably find one. And I just kept walking. I didn't find anything. It just wasn't clicking. There wasn't anything around me. I eventually came across a Weedle, which I tried to catch because I had to cross the road to get to it. And as soon as I got there, the Weedle disappeared. So I was like, fuck, well, this is pointless. I continued on, like, went down to a bar, found an area, a park, which I'd walked past loads of time. I'd never actually been inside. And it said it had a couple of Pokestops in it. And I kept going in, but it wasn't connecting. And I think it might have been the servers. It might have been my phone just being bad and having a terrible signal. So really, I think, like, it's more to do with the surroundings of my area than... the game itself, but I just didn't have a great experience with it. And yet it was kind of cool because I ended up walking for a much longer time than I'd intended to. I went into this park and went up the top of it and found a new area of my neighborhood that I'd not been to before. Like, despite that, it actually benefited me in some weird way. Like, it's those external elements that we've said, and that's what I got out of it. So I've not been out again. I've not tried it because my data is a little bit limited right now, and I need to save it until it gets topped up again. But it's a curious thing, and I just hope they make it better over time, really. Just as an experience.
Did you ever predict, like, in your wildest dreams, after we saw it had an awesome trailer, this game, like, ages ago, remember, with like the best there ever was and all that, and it was really cool. That is,
and it was
awesome.
for the 20th anniversary
for
stuff.
The 20th anniversary, of course. And like, did you ever envisage that it would do what it's done? Like, this is the most
No.
successful app. It holds the record for, like, North American downloads of all time in terms of, like, daily records and things like that. And it will, in time, I'm sure it will overtake, Candy Crush.
It is #1 grossing in every country it has been released in.
And apparently just by being #1 in the United States for a day gets you $2 to $3 million a day.
Yeah.
So it's already been there for, 2 weeks or something. That's crazy numbers, and it's going to be there for a long time to come.
And the funny thing is, like, the microtransactions do not seem aggressive at all. Like, this is a game that is not taking the sin of fucking Game of War and Candy Crush and all these goddamn stupid, annoying mobile games which force players to spend money if they want to get good. Like, this Clash Royale, which came out recently, and Brad and Dan keep talking about it, and they keep saying this game is terrible because they are only pairing you against players who have spent more money than you. And if you want to be better, spend money, And this game is not doing that. Like, there are elements that you can dig into and say, like, okay, I want to, get a bunch of Stardust, which is like some leveling mechanic thing that you can buy. But the fundamental thing is, like, they're not selling the candies, which are the things that let you... I don't know if they are. There's something they're not selling, which allows you to, like, beef out your Pokemon a ton and, like, make it really powerful. So essentially, you can't buy yourself to be the gym leader. You have to wander around and go to places and do stuff if you want to be good in this game. It's not, like, pay to win in that sense, which is surprising in an age where everything else that is top grossing is that stupid, disgusting model,
Yeah. It's just... It's like become the tech story of the year.
Yeah,
and it
it's like
came
every
out of nowhere.
website is writing about it. IGN were like, well, we had more traffic from Pokemon Go than we had from the entire of E3, which probably understandable, to be honest. Like, we think E3 is enormous, but, like, this is a reach like nothing else.
Every single mainstream broadcaster in the UK has done, like, a news package on Pokemon Go where they walk around the park with a camera and a microphone, and they do, vox pops of interviews with randomers walking around, and it's just like, wow, like, everyone wants a piece of this. And there's so many articles already generated, like, every single one of these things that's talking about all the negative aspects of it, and it's kind of like nothing you've ever seen before. It's like the media has been shoved into, like, not knowing how to react to this. And
Totally, yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how many different IPs try and copy the format. Because,
there are going to be copycats a dozen, I'll tell you.
You can stamp anything on this, and that's the thing, is that this was the first... geocaching has been around for quite a while, but this is the first geocaching app to link an incredibly powerful IP together with it. And
and that's ultimately what made this successful, is Ingress existed for ages. You need to have a recognizable thing to stick on it to make it popular, and that's what this did. I think another interesting thing about it is it really doesn't explain itself whatsoever, and there are so many things about the game that you wouldn't know unless someone told you. And funnily enough, I actually think that's kind of a cool aspect, and it works into the way that Pokemon did when we were younger, in the sense that it's about the playground chatter. It's about finding out from your friends what to do, how to catch Mewtwo, where do you get this Pokemon in this version, trading with people. Like, that aspect of it is a part of the ethos of that series, and as such, like, you'll find people saying, oh, by the way, if you're fighting a gym and you want to do more damage, if you hold on the touchscreen instead of tapping, you do, like, a special move, and stuff like all this hidden, like, layered parts of the game. I think I even saw Joe Merrick, who's the guy who runs Cerebi, tweet out that apparently people have hacked the data and all the different Pokemon have IVs. Like, they've gone that deep with it. So that's kind of crazy,
It's just such an exciting thing to be living through. And I'm just enjoying the ride. I'm not enjoying the game, obviously, like I said.
Right,
I can't
same.
be bothered. But I'm excited to see where this goes, how different companies respond to it, how the media responds to it, and how general society.
I mean, like, there's a lot of money to be made here. I don't know how long term it's going to be because we never know how long these things sizzle out. It's funny, Johnny Metz tweeted an article he wrote for his old website years and years ago about the Pokemon fad as it was back then, and how Nintendo were focusing on doing all these merchandising and things, and he basically was saying like he wanted it to just be focused on the video game and just do the video game. Why are you doing all this kiddie stuff? And he was incredibly wrong, because Pokemon became an incredible phenomenon because of those merchandising opportunities in the anime and the card game and the TV show and everything. And it's just funny how that kind of is ringing out even truer today with this.
Yeah, you don't want to end up being one of those journalists who's like, the famous people who denied that the internet was going to take off.
Yeah.
And just look like absolute idiots now.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a few out there who are currently doing that to Pokemon Go.
The think pieces are coming in hot. They're everywhere.
Exactly.
Anything you can link it to, they're doing. But like, it is just like, there are stories of restaurants and places that are taking people in and saying, hey, come here, we have Pokemon, come into our area, like, do all this stuff. It's a thing that happens like once in a generation, this kind of phenomenon. Yeah. And it's just fucking bananas.
Just wait till the legendaries come out.
Oh dear God, I don't even know if those are in the game. Like, can you get Zapdos and stuff?
Not yet. I heard there's gonna be like an announcement whether they're gonna come.
But maybe circling back to the origin point of this discussion, what does this do for Nintendo's image? Because ultimately, at the moment, they're in a bad position market-wise. Like, the Wii U is doing badly, the 3DS is slowing down, they're getting ready to announce a new console. I think that at the moment, and the trot they're on, from Zelda at E3 having incredible word of mouth, Pokemon Go being this ridiculous phenomenon, the NES Classic Edition being another play to a mainstream audience who want to remember the fondness of the old days of Nintendo, I think they could be in a very strong position, depending on the nature of NX, depending on how they market it and how they release it. They may not need to compete with Sony and Microsoft in that same arena. They may just need to be, we're Nintendo, we have strong brands, and you will come to us for those brands because you love them and you remember them and you're fond of them. How do you think they need to handle this going forward with NX, Bally?
Launch it with Pokemon Go. No, I think that they just need to protect their IP, make sure that they do keep up a standard of quality. I think I bet parts of Nintendo will be concerned at how dodgy at times Pokemon Go is, and that might be obviously we've just said that Nintendo aren't directly linked to Pokemon, but there obviously still is a link, and in people's minds there's a clear link.
Right, there obviously is, because that's the stock price that you hear has been going up. It's not the Pokemon companies, it's Nintendo's, because the synonymousness of them as a brand with Pokemon has, like, it's inextricable. Like, they are tied to one another, and as such, that's why people are investing, and that's why they've broken records, being the most traded stock in a single day in the Japanese stock market. It's bananas.
It's this constant thing that Nintendo have done for the last 20 years, is merge classic with modern. That's right, what Pokemon Go is. That's what Zelda Breath of the Wild was. That's what we want. That's what the NES Mini is, obviously. It's classic with modern, and the NX just needs to deliver that. It needs to say, look, here's a classic thing Nintendo have done, here's a modern twist. Here's another classic thing Nintendo have done, here's another modern twist. Come out with some huge game launches that we've already, spitballed about on the show, and tell people, we're Nintendo, this is what we're about, and you need to buy an NX. And I think I have every confidence from these last three events that you've just described that September, October, and the reveal of the NX is going to be a pretty special time.
Yeah, it's such a crazy turnaround that has happened in the last few months in terms of my perspective on where Nintendo are in the market, what they can do to recapture people, how can they find themselves to be relevant again in the console space. And in that short time, we have had these three things that seem like on their own kind of maybe, before they happened, innocuous. Like, okay, of course there's going to be a new Zelda. Oh, they're doing that Pokemon Mobile thing. Okay, like this is a nice thing for the holiday.
Grabbers.
They are. They're all headline grabbers.
Huge.
And they are all positive word of mouth, nostalgia plays, ways that the brand of Nintendo is being elevated. And ultimately, I think that's what they need to focus on, is Nintendo as a company with strong franchises, and you can't get them in other places that are not Nintendo. Well, obviously, with Pokemon Go you can. And all these mobile things you can. But they are branching out to say, here's a taste of this, here's a taste of this. Do you want the real thing? Come to our platform. And I think that Sun and Moon are going to sell phenomenally after this has happened. They are going to probably be record breakers in terms of Pokemon games. Like, they could be very smart and aggressive about 2DS bundle prices and things like that.
Yes.
It is going to be a thing that they should focus on and should be aware of doing. And man, I am very confident now that Nintendo will be able to find their place again. And as we always say, never count Nintendo out.
Yeah.
Because they've had bad times, they've jumped back from them before. These are bad times, and look at the jump they are making right now.
We should very quickly mention before we close out this show that they obviously did do like almost as like a snap reaction to Pokemon Go was, the cut in price sale for the Gen 1 Pokemon games, Red, Blue, and Yellow on 3DS, cut by third off. So I believe in the UK they're about £4.50 or so.
No, £6.29 because they were premium before.
Yes, of course. So they're like £8-9 before. But yeah, I mean that's decent price, and I'm sure they're gonna sell well on top of all this. So just good, it's sensible, smart moves. And that's not something we're used to recently.
No, it's not. So, very positive, good stuff. And man, let's talk more about Nintendo next time. How about that, Bally? Because it's pretty much going to wrap us up. So, as we throw down for the end of the show, I would like to remind you that we are currently in the process of another backlog club. I hope some of you have started on Earthbound, which is our next backlog club game. And we will be getting to that probably in about a month or so. I'm thinking like start of September is probably a good time. So as we said last time, it's a long game. It's a big RPG. You got to dig into it. So we want to give you as much time as possible to play it along with us. And do remember to send in all your thoughts. Get us some emails, and we will have some discussion on the podcast when we get to that episode. Bally, do you want to tell people where they can send that feedback to?
Please send your Earthbound feedback to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
It's a great internet place to do the sending of the emails. Go find us on the internet and other places. I'm on Twitter at Lordnbz. That is also my Miiverse name. If you want to see some anime, go to my Miiverse, because that's a lot of it. Bally, how about you?
I am at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN 91. That is also my name on the Miiverse. I'll hopefully be posting more on there soon.
Excellent stuff. You can also find us on Twitter as a podcast, and the podcast Twitter is at TNL Podcast. So if you want to see video things we do and all of the updates on when the show is coming out, be sure to follow us on Twitter as a podcast. You can find us on other places on the internet, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. We're usually coming out on different services across the week. So you can subscribe and hopefully review us. Reviews would be nice. I haven't had a review in a long time. And if you like the show, that would be appreciated. It helps us get noticed by more listeners and helps grow the listenership of the podcast. But I think that's pretty much it, Bally. Is there anything else that we need to stab before we get on out of here?
No, just, it's a big summer coming up. Big summer for the show.
Yeah. We're going to be covering it as per usual. So we will be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more Nintendo thoughts, some more things to discuss, and some video games. So thank you all for listening. We'll be with you again 2 weeks' time. Till then, goodbye.
The musical interludes used in today's episode were both from Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE, the first being Reincarnation, the second being Feel. Both copyright Nintendo and Atlas 2016.